Most data breaches don't happen because of elite hackers. They happen because someone had access they shouldn't have had. Too much access, or wrong access, or access that was never removed. And in data platforms, where everything is centralized, IAM is not just a security topic, it is the security topic. In application security, IAM protects features. In data platforms, IAM protects raw truths. Customer data, financial data, PII or business secrets, and unlike applications, data platforms are shared, multi-team and often cross-environment. On top of that, they are full of different service principles, sometimes pipelines, notebooks and other business intelligence tools. It's not just who can log in, this is more like who can read, who can modify, who can drop, who can extract and who can share externally. That is a very different problem to application world where you have only basically a set of users and roles. It is quite limited in terms of what you should allow. IAM has 4 fundamental building blocks. Number 1 is identity, number 2 is authentication, number 3 is authorization, and the last one is audit. So, identity provider or identity. Basically, who or what is requesting access. It can be a human user or a service principal or a managed identity or CD/CI pipeline or some sort of a reporting tool or notebook runtime, you name them. If you don't know exactly what identity exists in your platform, then you don't control it. And the identity provider, it is a way to offload this capability or this responsibility to something else. Next is authentication. How do you verify that identity? The examples could be the SSO or OAuth or service principal secrets or managed identities. Yet again, it is the proof who you are. But authentication alone does nothing for security because the next important bit is authorization. Basically, what are you allowed to do? This is where real architecture begins. Examples could be the read-only analysts or the data engineer with write permissions or admin at a workspace level or catalog level access, and then you can dive even deeper into row level security or the column masking and object level security and so on. This is where the most platforms become really messy from experience, and we will have a separate video on that topic alone. And the last is the audit. Who did what? Basically, without auditing, you cannot detect abuse of your permissions, you cannot investigate incidents, and the most important bit for the security, you cannot prove compliance. Let's talk about challenges and best practices next for data platform. First of all, challenges. On top of just architecting good set of roles, so who would use what and follow the least privilege principle, you can name those three as main challenges. Scalability, basically that your identity provider needs to be able to handle your users and resources, and it's not only for your identity provider to be able to handle those load, but on top of that, for your admins, IT people, to be able to onboard users to access the system. Next is performance, and if you have your identity provider working in a very slow way, let's say it that way, then your business users wouldn't really be happy if in order to open a report based on your data, they need to wait for 5 minutes to authenticate and click through the phone about zillion of times. And the last challenge, which is the biggest one, is governance. Basically, it is appearing everywhere now, and you need to balance your security with productivity to be able to prove who did what and that they need to be able to do that. It is a very challenging topic and very interesting one for sure. Still, we have some best practices as well to help with almost all of those. First of all, to enforce the MFA. With the MFA, it actually handles like 99.9% of automated attacks, cyber attacks, according to Microsoft. and that's a very nice number, but it is only for the automated brute force attacks where someone tries to hack the password of existing users. Still, nothing to sneeze at. Next, least privilege. That principle that I mentioned time and time again basically grant only the minimum access necessary to reduce the risk and to improve the work load on your admins, automate everything. That comes from DevOps heart. Everything needs to be automated. From the governance perspective, you need to have a regular access review. So periodically check who has what level of access, and if they need it, remove it. And next, to have a comprehensive audit logs. So when someone reads the data, that needs to be logged and saved to the database, and you can check those logs later when needed. Now let's get to the Fabric world and check how those 4 pillars or 4 layers of IAM work over here. First of all, you can have, and most likely you will have, Entra ID as your identity provider, and you will control access to your system using Entra ID. So it will be in Azure portal, and you will go to Entra ID and you can create new users. For this exercise, I added a new user, which is a Fabric secondary, and it will have correct domain, correct tenant for Fabric purposes. Then for the authentication, Entra once again will take care of it, and it will require the 2-factor authentication, and it will ask for the password and all of that. Next bit is the most interesting one, authorization. That can be done on multiple different levels, and the very top one, where most teams actually make this mistake, is you can manage access on a workspace level. So if you click on a workspace ... and workspace access, this is where you can add different levels of access. So if you add a new people, so for example my Fabric secondary, I can select viewer, so this is pretty much a read-only mode, or contributor. This is the person who can do the development work, so they can create new items inside of the Fabric, they can manage how those Fabric items would work, and so on and so forth. After that you have a member, and the member on top of that, and this is actually a confusing bit between those two, member can do everything that a contributor do, so do the actual work, but on top of that member can manage access to this workspace, but with a limit that the members, they cannot assign admins. Admins are pretty much the owners of the workspace, and they can do everything, including deletion and restoration of the workspaces. Members cannot delete the workspace, and members cannot assign admin permissions, but they can do everything else. So the good rule of thumb is to assign someone only the viewer permission to have a read-only mode if they need to, and if they need to do some work, then a contributor for a regular database engineers or data engineers, and then members for privileged people, and admin is basically only the owner. I'm not going to add my Fabric secondary, because the issue with workspace access is that when you grant access to workspace, then that person will be able automatically, even with the viewer permission, to see everything inside of it. And in a common scenario where I want, for example, my reporting team to work only on a report, they don't need to know how the data will end up in the lake houses or in my warehouses. They just need to know that the data is there and they can read it. So you're not going to give a viewer permission to your reporting team, and inside, the good rule of thumb is to create a separate workspace for them. For example, in my case, I created over here the consumer workspace, and on that workspace, finally, I gave my Fabric secondary the viewer permissions, so they can see every side of it. And inside of the consumer workspace, I created a single lakehouse, which will have a shortcut to the customers table. In a scenario where that Fabric secretary is some sort of analyst and they need to have access to data in a read-only mode, it is much better to give them the workspace viewer access to the consumer workspace and create this shortcut. And the shortcut is done quite easily, so you can create a not schema shortcut, but instead you can create a new table shortcut like that. Select it is from one leg, and you will see, because right now I am in a privileged mode, my user has permission to other workspaces, not only the consumer. You can give something from the dev workspace. So for example, in Lakehouse Silva, I can select a table. Well, I have customers as well over here, and it would be possible to create this shortcut, and this shortcut will be available in a read-only mode. So exactly what we want, that customers one, because I have a duplicate name. But on top of that, it is possible, if for some other reasons I want to grant specific permissions on Lakehouse level, for example, it is possible to manage permissions over here. And in here you can see that my Fabric user or some other users, I can manage specific permissions for those. So let's say I will grant Fabric secondary some permissions, and by default it will grant them only read access to this one. So in other words, if you don't mind for your analysts to see how the access to the data is managed, so all of the pipelines and notebooks, if you are fine with them being able to read them, which you shouldn't according to the principle of least privilege, still you would be able to manage access, specific access to lakehouses or data warehouses like that with managed permissions. On top of that, there is even more fine granular type of access that you can run, and this is using this query. You can check what is the current permissions that are assigned to the database, and on top of that, you can manage them in a usual SQL query way. So grant select, or grant inserts, or grant updates, and so on and so forth. And after that, you can actually drop access or revoke access with revoke command, SQL command, on a Fabric secondary. But the interesting bit is that when you grant even just select, and that's what I did with this first one, grant select on customers, it will end up with two permissions actually. One of them is connect, and another one, what we granted, the select one. Connect is pretty much access to Fabric. And you wouldn't be able to revoke this command, and the only way to get rid of it is using just a drop user command. Let's just have a quick look what I have in my Fabric secondary account. I logged into Fabric with this account now, and in a workspaces I can see only the consumer, even though according to this according to this command, I can connect to the Lakehouse Bronze in a dev workspace, and I can select something, but because I don't have access to the workspace itself, I wouldn't be able to see it in a UI, but it would be allowed to connect to it using API calls if I would run them. But I have access to my consumer workspace. In here, the Fabric secondary is a viewer, and in that viewer mode, I can see everything in a consumer workspace. And in that Lakehouse, I can connect to the SQL endpoint and run my queries for tables that are there. So, for example, the customers table, and I can run a new query. So select stuff from DBO customers, and it will be from the first customers table that I have. there we go. So, to wrap it up, here's a clean mental model to handle the IAM in modern data platforms. First of all, to have a centralized identity provider, so Entra ID, Okta or anything. All authentication should flow from here. Next is to create role-based user groups, not individual users. So you can create, for example, data engineers dev and put all your developers and data engineers into that user group and assign permission on a group level, not on individual user level. That is much easier to manage and handle later on. After that, to have environmental isolation. So you need to separate your dev environment from your test environment from your production environment with progressively stricter controls. So in dev environment, for example, your data engineers might have their manage workspace access level, as I showed in Fabric, but in test and especially in prod, read-only is everything that they will need, and even then read-only mode access for them might not be needed at all, because debugging should be done beforehand, and yeah, the read access could be granted on per need basis. And the last, which we will discuss in the next video, as I said before, is to implement data level security. So where required the row level security or masking or restricted schemas and the data classification, that is basically where IAM meets data governance. Well, I hope this video was helpful, and see you soon.